Allison Raskin. Thanks for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
So first I want to tell the audience a little bit about you. Your new book, Overthinking About You, which I love the title, Navigating Romantic... You're welcome. Navigating romantic relationships when you have anxiety, OCD, or depression. Mental Health Awareness Month. This is the perfect time, obviously, to launch your book. Congratulations. So Allison, you are a New York Times, and just in case you didn't know, you're a New York Times bestselling author. You're the co-host of a popular podcast, Just Between Us, and co-creator of a YouTube channel by the same name. You have written and developed multiple TV shows, created the original scripted podcast Gossip, a vocal mental health advocate. You also run, just in case you didn't know, the mental health focused Instagram account, Emotional Support Lady. I will link to all things Allison in the notes after this, so check those out. So I'm really, really excited to have you here. My show, The Grown Ass Woman's Guide, is for women over 40. Here's the thing. I've been listening a lot lately to this whole like women over 50 should have younger mentors. And I've taken it to heart. And so for the last couple of weeks, I've been interviewing millennials specifically. You ladies are blowing my mind with, a few things that maybe it took us longer to figure out. So I thank you for that. So before we get into the book, do you find that women your age in your 30s, what do you offer you think that's different than from what maybe women like myself over 50 might offer the world? I'm putting you on the spot.
Oh, wow. I think I see in my peers more of a willingness to sort of strike down the things that we've been told are the way that the world works.
Yes.
Like more of a willingness to redefine life and how we want to live and examine the societal messaging that isn't serving us. And therefore, we are willing to unpack and stop listening to.
Fully agree from this angle, and I was talking to somebody else about like, I think it's twofold, right? Part of us is like, wait, how come you get to learn that younger? And we had to wait until we're in our 40s and 50s. And then also on the flip side, like, yes, we're applauding you because a lot of it's just a bunch of bullshit.
So much of it is.
And you figured it out early and you're willing to talk about mental health. You're willing to talk about our needs as a whole, and not that they're a weakness, but that they are necessary. So I appreciate that. So now let's talk about the book though. So you talk about anxiety, depression, and OCD. A lot of people are having these conversations. Not many people, I haven't seen one who's having these conversations in regards to relationships. Why is that so important?
I think we've done a lot of great work in terms of normalizing certain things and being more open about, I have anxiety, I go to therapy. But the conversation kind of stops when it comes to, and what does that mean for your daily life? What are the details of that? How is that showing up? And so it really shows up for a lot of people in their romantic relationships, which makes sense because that's the area of our life where we're the most vulnerable, where we have the most lack of control, because when you engage in a relationship with somebody, you're giving them the ability to hurt you.
Right.
And so a lot of times this can be an area where our symptoms come out the most, but then we aren't given any tools to how to deal with that. And then we just feel like we're failures, or we're bad at dating, or we don't know how to make a relationship work. When in reality, those are all skills that we need to learn. They don't come naturally.
Yeah. And, I think back to when I first started dating. I did a lot of dating in the 90s before I got married. And I think sometimes, depending on who I was with, you could have probably considered me the quote unquote crazy girl. And I look back, I had a ton of anxiety. I used to shotgun a beer before I went on any first date because it was just too overwhelming. And
I think a lot of people do similar coping skills.
Yeah. And so no one ever talked about the fact that that could be anxiety. I just thought I sucked at dating,
Exactly.
And so how do you think that, how do these how does anxiety show up in a dating life? Like, what does it look like, at least for you? How does that manifest?
So for me, a big problem was that I could not deal with the uncertainty that often relationships bring. And so I really needed things to be defined right away. I needed to feel like we were heading towards marriage. I needed everything to be like locked in and settled by the second date. And that's just like not realistic. It's not an okay ask of the other person. And so I really needed to learn, how do I tolerate the discomfort of the uncertainty? How can I tolerate the fact that I don't know where this is going because it's too early for me to know that yet? And so sort of building up that tolerance. And then another big thing was our anxiety, because it loves certainty, will often give explanations for things that it doesn't really know anything about. So it will like assign meaning to other people's actions. It will make assumptions about other people's behavior that's not based in fact. It's just an assumption. Right. But then the anxiety tells you, oh no, they're not texting you back right now because they don't like you, but they're just in a meeting, allowing for there to be other explanations other than the worst case one is very freeing.
Right. They're not trapped under something heavy. But how do you know the difference between anxiety and just immaturity?
In what sense? That you just
like when
might not be ready to date, or?
Yeah, I think, I mean, if my husband walked away today and I was out there dating, I'm going to approach it very differently. I'm still the same person. I still have anxiety, but I have enough experience that I see things differently. And so, when you take someone who's young, under 30, and she's sort of struggling with some of this stuff, how much, could it be immaturity, or is she just a person with anxiety? How do we know the difference?
So I wouldn't necessarily say immaturity. I would say a lack of experience. And so when you don't have,
I'm using them interchangeably a little.
Yeah. And I would also argue that you're not the same person that you were. That you have had so many different experiences, and you probably also have a different relationship to your anxiety than you did when you were younger and single.
That's a good point. You're right.
And having a different perspective changes who you are and how you interact. And so that's why I think that these conversations are so important, so that when people don't have a lot of experience and they maybe go through their first heartbreak when they're 24, to have, maybe you don't have your own personal perspective, but you can get the perspective of other people. You can hear stories of other people getting through that. You can see examples of people finding love again, and sometimes again and again. And really also honoring the fact that when we are younger, we feel emotions bigger. It is harder to emotionally regulate before your brain is fully formed. So cutting yourself some slack and not feeling like a mess of a person because you're hysterically crying over your first heartbreak. You're kind of supposed to. It's heartbreaking, Right. These are the things that cause us to have big emotions. It's then just trying really hard not to attach unnecessary meaning to those big emotions, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And I love in the book, you talk about your personal experience, but you also bring in experts to say, hey, you may want to look at it this way. And I think this should be required reading for anyone, young and old, but specifically young, who do have those big feelings. A lot of women in my community have kids your age, frankly, and are going through, or in their 20s even, I think you're 32, right?
Yes.
So they have young adults who are going through some of these things, and it's really hard to be able to be there. I think there's this draw to make it all better, or this whole I can't touch that. So this book helps to understand what younger people might be going through. And let's be honest, a lot of women over 40 are back in the dating game and don't have a lot of experience and do have mental illness. And so I think it's really helpful there too. So what would how would depression look in a relationship or while dating?
I think one of the tricky things with depression is making sure that your partner doesn't take it personally, because if you're suffering from a depressive episode, you're just enjoying life less, if at all. And so that can make the partner feel like you're unhappy with them or you're unhappy with the relationship. And that's why communication is so important, for you to have the vocabulary to say, this isn't about you. This is my brain telling me really awful things, and I'm going to do what I can do to get myself out of this. And really relaying to your partner that, like, even though when you're depressed, it can be so challenging to be active and proactive about anything. But I think it's really important to notice the signs in yourself as soon as possible and address them as quickly as possible. Because if you wait, it becomes much more harder to get activated. But if you're someone who's had depressive episodes in the past, you'll probably notice the warning signs and step in as quickly as you can before you kind of fall all the way down.
Right. And you talk a lot about how to communicate about any mental illness in a relationship. I can imagine you don't put it as your bio online and your online dating profile, but at what point, like, what are the rules, or like, what are the guidelines for having some of these conversations?
It's really tricky because it's so context dependent. And instead of giving like a timeline in terms of, on the third date, mention your therapist, and on the fifth date, mention, that you self-harm, I think it's much more important to just really key into what stage of the relationship am I in? Am I at a stage where we are actually sharing important things about ourselves? And for a lot of older daters, that can honestly come up on the first date. Sometimes the first date with someone, when it's going well, is like 3 or 4 hours. And so in that time, you are going to touch on some bigger things. But I think what matters more than the timing of the disclosure is the way in which you disclose. And really having an understanding of what this means to you and how it interferes with your life and your view of it. And hopefully having come to some level of acceptance, right? Because if you still feel a lot of shame and guilt around, having, let's say, OCD, that person's going to feel that, right? And you're sort of like giving them that information with that bias. So it could be really helpful for you to get to a place where you accept your OCD, you don't judge yourself for your OCD, and then it's easier to sort of disclose to a partner, hey, this is a part of my life, but I'm in control of it. I'm in the driver's seat around this. And I'm just telling you to tell you so that you can understand me better, instead of I'm telling you because this is going to become your responsibility if you date me. Right.
It's just, it's information. Absolutely. And, you also talk a lot about shame around medication. And this one, I have been off on medication. I have family members who've at times been on medication. I think it's something so important to talk about. With my girlfriends, we can be completely open, but as a general rule, it's not discussed so much. So do you think that shame is still there? Do you think it's changing? What are your thoughts?
I hope it's changing, but I think it's definitely still there. And also, I think that it makes a lot of sense that people feel shame about their own disorders. Like, we live in a society that has taught us to feel shame around these things. So don't judge yourself for having the shame in the first place. Like, have self-compassion for yourself that you have that shame, and then hopefully sort of do the work to work through it and get past it. And with the medication of it all, my main thesis in the book isn't that everyone needs medication. It's that if you are someone who could benefit from it, don't let your fears around it stop you from exploring that option, because then you're really doing yourself a disservice.
Yeah, I see it a lot where it's like, I see people who have, I'm not a doctor, don't write me letters, but who clearly have anxiety and struggle around, with that anxiety, but refuse to do anything about it because they think it's just supposed to be that way. And it's really hard to watch another person struggle with it. You know what I mean? When you could see it so clearly. So I hope that the conversations can be more open so that people do feel confident in saying, yeah, I have anxiety, I have depression, I have OCD. I need a little bit of help. You know, I mean, we wouldn't be that way if you had a urinary tract infection. We wouldn't be like, you weak bitch, you know. Right. You know, it's like, of course you're going to take the medication so you can feel better. And yet we still have this stigma. So one of the things, I love your stories. I love how honest you are. And also on your podcast, your YouTube channel as well. You had me laughing with the video you did announcing the book with your boyfriend was hilarious. You two are adorable. I wonder, how do we deal? So you talk a lot about you having mental illness and being in these relationships. I can only assume all of these men weren't like always perfectly healthy themselves. How do we know and deal if we believe the person that we're dating might suffer or struggle with one of these?
It's tricky, but I actually think that it's a really loving and caring thing to do to talk to your partner about it. But it's really important the way in which you talk about it. So coming from a place of empathy, coming from a place of I want to support you, and also coming from a place of you're in charge here. So what do you think will help? Instead of I'm here to fix you, follow these 10 steps so that you can get better ASAP. You know?
Right. Get out of my head, Allison. Stop. Yeah. But what if he's not, you know, because I think it's a totally different story when it comes to men and them admitting that they've got some of these challenges. And so a lot of men aren't necessarily even recognizing them in themselves. And so I'm just curious, let's say you're dating someone who doesn't necessarily see that he has anxiety or feels like his depression, like he's not depressed, he just has bad days or whatever it is. Do you bring it up with him?
I think so. And I actually have a section of the book dedicated to men and mental health because it is even more stigmatized for them. Mm-hmm. And I think the first step is acknowledging that, right? Understanding why it is harder for them to accept this, that they have been raised in the opposite of the way that we would have hoped that they would have been raised, you know, that like they often view it as a weakness. They feel like they can't talk about it. A lot of times also symptoms in men will show up so differently than symptoms in women or non-binary people. And so I think allowing an understanding of why this might be a little trickier than if they brought this concern to you. But then also really recognizing that you don't have to accept them not getting help. That if you're allowed to say, hey, if you don't address this, I can't see myself staying in this relationship. And that sounds like an ultimatum because it is, but it's an ultimatum in the sense of your behavior, that you know that you cannot stay in something like this. Not, if you don't do this, then I'm leaving. You know, like making it centered around your life and your experience and providing them with resources and helping them. But if they're not willing to take that step, then you really have to have a conversation with yourself about, is this the kind of life and partnership that I want? And sometimes the answer is no, and that's okay.
Yeah. And that's a great point. You know, it's a boundary. I mean, we constantly talk about establishing boundaries. It's not that person has to change. It's what you yourself will accept in your own life, you know?
Exactly. And my basic premise of the whole book is that your mental health is your responsibility and you have to care for it in order to have healthy relationships. So if your partner isn't doing that, it's going to be really hard to have a healthy relationship. Yeah.
You know, I see a lot, sometimes the mental illness can get in the way of getting help. Like when someone feels depressed, sometimes we can get comfortable in that depression and not want help. So or think I've got this on my own, or just like, have you ever been so mad that you actually are feeling pretty confident and comfortable in that anger? And then you find out that it was a misunderstanding and you're like, but I want to be mad. This anger, so when my dogs are going wild, I don't know what's happening. Can you hear, I don't know if you can hear that. But what about like, if you're in that depression or you start to rely on your anxiety, do you have any tips for someone to sort of get themselves out of it to get that help?
It's hard. You can't force someone to want to help themselves.
Yeah.
I think that it's just tricky. Like, you're right. Especially when someone is depressed, it can feel really hard to want to activate yourself and to even believe that it's possible to get on the other side of it. So sometimes it's looking at the mental health history, right? Does this person have a history of having depressive episodes? So then it can really be reminding yourself that, oh, I've had this before and I've come out of this before. I think that can be incredibly powerful, looking back on what helped you the last time. And then if it's your first one, which can be so scary and kind of debilitating, sometimes it's waiting. For a lot of people, it won't last forever. You go through periods of a depressive episode. And then once you're maybe out of it, it's really saying, okay, I don't want that to happen again for the length of time that it happened again. So I need to, now that I'm feeling better, I need to work on myself. I need to get some coping skills. I also need to pay attention the next time I'm noticing some symptoms that it might be happening again, and sort of like build up your arsenal once you're out of it, so that if it does return, you're in a better place to handle it.
Yeah, that's a great tip. I have a family member I want to keep, private, a young family member who struggled with, the pandemic, with school, with all of those changes and the disconnection. And then recently has been feeling really, really great and back like in a very empowered state. And so on occasion, when we talk about some of the feelings and stuff, I say, I just want you to, like, life is cyclical, right? Like it's there are ups and downs and all of that. And I just want you to understand that this happiness is possible, because it's not going to be, you're not always going to be euphoric, but I want you to understand that you can get back here. So when things feel so tough, and this is not a mental health thing per se, but a cycle of, adolescence. Because I think we forget sometimes when we're in the thick of it that we can feel other things. And so just building that self-trust that you can get into a better place, And
it's really hard when this is your first bad time, right?
Yeah.
So for kids and for teenagers, it can feel like the end of the world because they don't have any evidence that it's not.
That's right. That's right.
And really having compassion for them in that moment, instead of like, well, why don't you have the perspective that I, an older person who's been through a lot of things and recovered from a lot of things, have?
That's right.
Like, we have to give them the time and the life experience to have that perspective.
Yes. And, as you said in the beginning, we can learn from other people, but we also, to some degree, need to go through our own experiences to really learn it. The concepts are there when we learn from other people. Yeah. So if somebody were just flipping through the book and had 5 minutes or 1 hour, where do you want them to stop? What is the biggest message, biggest takeaway you want them to get from this?
Oh boy. It's a
No
book
pressure.
filled with hope that I think is woven throughout,
Yes.
And I say at the beginning that this is not going to be a bait and switch. This isn't going to be a book where about finding romantic love and then at the end saying all you need is to live yourself. My goal for this book is to prioritize people who want partners. It is okay to want a partner. And if that is something that you want for yourself, then you should absolutely go after it, even if it involves a little bit more work than some people around you. But that you're worth that work, and you're worth getting your goal, even if your goal is marriage. You know, like you deserve to have the life that you want, regardless of whatever struggles you've been through or are going through.
Right. And one last question, because I loved that you tackled this in the book. Do you believe in the one? Finding the one?
Absolutely not. I think the myth of the one is like one of the most harmful messages out there.
Agreed.
There is not one person for you. There is the potential to build a wonderful and healthy relationship with so many different people. And it can feel like it's magic and you should just, when you know, and then it'll all be easy when you find that person.
Right.
And then guess what? Why does every relationship feel like it's not enough or that it's not right? Because you have an unrealistic expectation of what a good relationship feels like. And I think
That's
it's
right.
actually really exciting for there not to be the one. Because what if I don't find him? You know, if there's only one person out there for me, I got to really get searching. But if there's a plethora of people that are a good fit for me, it's much more likely I'm going to bump into one of them.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that you think that way and that you're talking about it because, you know, I'll even talk to my kids like, your dad's not the one. And we've been married for 20 years this year. So, but he's the one for me, like in this lifetime. I'm hoping that he's always the one I chose. But, you know, there are different qualities in different people who bring out who we want to be at that time and that gel with us at that time. And we hope that we'll grow with someone and continue to have each other's back and love each other. But as divorce and death and other, you know, circumstances separate people, you're right that it's so dangerous for us to be like that Prince Charming, you know, he's going to like you're a puzzle piece and then it just clicks into place and then, oh, you know, it doesn't work that way. So.
And you're never going to feel happy if you think it works that way.
That's exactly right. You're always going to be looking. Allison Raskin, thank you so much. Congratulations on the book, the success of your podcast, everything that you're doing. I feel extremely hopeful that the next generation is mixing things up and not carrying on the messages that we sort of passed on. I mean, you know, I talk all the time about Gen X and all the badass stuff that we've done to move the needle. But when it comes to mental health, millennials, you have your finger on the pulse. And I appreciate that very much.
Oh, thank you. And I think Gen Z is doing it even better.
Well, I'll get into them next year. So
Exactly.
Awesome. Thanks, Allison.
Thank you so much.